David Walsh liked working nights on Meridian Station. It was quiet, and he could fix computer problems without people bothering him. The space station was huge, floating in empty space between human and alien worlds. It kept thousands of refugees and diplomats alive. Tonight felt like any other night. David sat in his chair, looking at computer screens that showed problems with the station systems. 3 refugee computers were running slow. The secret communication channels had strange signals. Someone was trying to break into the main computer that handled food and supplies. The aliens called Cathurians had been using Meridian Station for 8 months now. They were processing refugees, people who had lost their homes because of the war. David didn't know much about politics, but he knew his job was important. If the computers stopped working, people would die. His workspace had many screens showing everything from air systems to secret messages between governments. The 2 species were still learning to trust each other after the fighting stopped. Refugee ship number 17 has communication problems, announced the station's computer in a calm voice. It will take 47 minutes to fix using normal methods. David started checking what was wrong. He quickly found the problem. Someone was blocking the ship's radio signals on purpose. This wasn't an accident, someone was jamming their communications. This was bad news. David knew he should tell security, but that would take too long. The ship had 3,000 refugees on it, floating in dangerous space. 47 minutes was too long to wait. David made a decision. He used emergency powers to boost the ship's signals and create new communication paths. This was against the rules unless people were in real danger. But David thought 47 minutes was too risky. The boost worked right away. Contact with Ship 17 came back, and David learned the truth was much worse than he thought. "This is Ship 17 calling Meridian Station," came the voice through David's speakers. "We are under attack by unknown ships using both human and alien weapons. People are hurt. We need help right now." David's emergency call brought security and diplomats running. His computer logs showed that the attack had been planned with the communication jamming to stop calls for help. "Good work, Walsh," said Commander Morrison after they saved Ship 17. "You probably saved 3,000 lives. But what made you think the communication problems were suspicious?" "The interference was too perfect to be natural or random equipment failure," David answered. But he kept quiet about seeing similar problems with other refugee ships over the past few weeks. Someone with good technology was targeting refugee communications on purpose. "Someone with access to both human and alien military codes," added Dr. Chin, the intelligence expert. Her face showed she had been suspecting this for a while. "This takes planning and resources way beyond simple piracy." The meeting ended with better security for refugee ships and more watching of communication systems. David went back to his regular work, but now he felt uncomfortable knowing that the refugee operations he supported were being attacked by people with advanced technology and unknown reasons. His shift continued through the night. He kept monitoring networks and occasionally boosting communications for ships that were having problems. These problems were becoming disturbingly common. By 3 a.m., David had recorded 17 separate cases of communication interference affecting refugee operations. This created a pattern that looked like organized effort rather than random technical problems. The technical center had a small rest area where David could take short breaks during long night shifts. It had a basic bed and privacy screens that let him rest while staying close to the monitoring systems that needed constant attention. It was during one of these rest periods that David's routine night became something much more complicated than network maintenance and refugee assistance. He woke up to find he was not alone in the operations center. A young alien girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old, was sitting calmly in his work chair. She seemed to have been waiting patiently for him to wake up rather than trying to access his systems or wake him from needed rest. "Good morning, David Walsh," she said in accented but clear Galactic Standard language. Her purple eyes reflected light from the monitoring displays. "My name is Lyra Zenvari, and I need your help with something that could prevent a war." David sat up slowly. His technical training immediately thought about the security problems of finding an unauthorized person in a restricted area. But his humanitarian instincts recognized that the girl appeared to be another refugee seeking help rather than a security threat requiring immediate alarms. "How did you get in here?" he asked, noting that all security systems seemed to be working normally despite someone being here who shouldn't have clearance to access the Technical Operations Center. "Courier protocols," Lyra replied matter-of-factly, like someone explaining routine procedures. "Ancient truce laws that allow protected messengers to seek help during humanitarian emergencies. Your station systems recognize my authority to request help from neutral parties." David looked at his monitoring displays, seeing confirmation that courier protocols had indeed been activated. His systems had granted access to someone whose legal status under alien law apparently overrode normal station security procedures. "What kind of help?" he asked, understanding that his next decisions would either resolve a routine refugee assistance request or involve him in diplomatic complexities his technical training hadn't prepared him for. Lyra reached into her travel pack and pulled out a sealed data device that pulsed with internal light patterns David recognized as quantum encryption markers. "I need your technical expertise to decrypt information that could save thousands of lives," she said simply. "But I should warn you that helping me will change your life in ways that neither of us can predict." As David looked at the young courier, whose calm competence suggested she was much more than a simple refugee seeking routine assistance, he realized that his quiet night shift was about to become significantly more complicated than network maintenance and communication monitoring. The only question was whether he was prepared for responsibilities that went far beyond keeping computer systems running smoothly. David studied the data device in Lyra's hands, noting the sophisticated quantum encryption signatures that marked it as containing information classified at levels requiring both technical expertise and legal authority to access. The device itself was amazing alien technology, a crystal matrix that stored data in quantum states while providing multiple layers of security that would resist most conventional decryption attempts. "Courier protocols grant me authority to seek technical assistance from neutral parties," Lyra explained, her calm professionalism suggesting extensive training in diplomatic procedures despite her apparent youth. "But the encryption requires specific human expertise in quantum computing and network security to decode the contents." "What kind of information requires that level of security?" David asked, though he was already activating diagnostic systems that could interface with alien quantum storage technology. "Evidence of systematic sabotage targeting refugee convoys, supply distributions, and humanitarian facilities," Lyra replied, her voice carrying undertones of controlled urgency. "Proof that the attacks you've been detecting are part of a coordinated conspiracy to create crisis conditions that justify abandoning ceasefire agreements." David's understanding of the situation shifted as he realized that his technical observations about communication interference were part of a larger pattern that someone had been working to hide. "You're saying the convoy attacks are deliberate?" "I'm saying that officials from both human and alien governments have been working together to create humanitarian disasters that can be used to restart profitable wars," Lyra said, activating the data device's interface protocols, creating holographic displays that showed preliminary data requiring decryption. "The evidence is encrypted using both human and alien protocols specifically to ensure that no single party can access it without cooperation from the other species." David examined the encryption patterns, recognizing quantum signature methods that combined human mathematical approaches with alien techniques in ways that created security systems more sophisticated than either species could develop independently. "This will take time to decrypt properly," he said, beginning the complex process of interfacing his systems with the alien storage technology. "And I should mention that accessing classified information without proper authorization could create significant legal complications for both of us. The courier protocols provide legal authority for emergency access to information necessary for preventing humanitarian disasters," Lyra replied, though something in her expression suggested the situation was more complex than routine diplomatic immunity. "Though I should warn you that accepting this mission will activate the courier's bond, making you legally responsible for my safety and the success of this operation." The courier's bond? Ancient alien law that creates protective relationships between couriers and those who assist them during critical missions. "By helping me decrypt this data, you become my provisional protector under laws that both our species recognize as binding." David paused in his setup procedures, understanding that Lyra was offering him a choice that would either involve him in diplomatic complexities beyond his technical expertise or leave critical information encrypted while people died from preventable violence. "What happens if I choose not to help?" "Then the evidence remains encrypted. The conspiracy continues its operations, and thousands more refugees die in attacks that could be prevented by exposing the truth." Lyra's expression grew serious. "But if you do help, you become a target for elimination by people who view dead witnesses as preferable to living proof of their crimes." David looked around his technical operations center, where his routine work had been providing essential support for humanitarian operations that were apparently being systematically sabotaged by the very people responsible for maintaining them. "How long do we have before this becomes urgent?" "The conspiracy's timeline calls for triggering a major refugee incident at dawn that would justify military intervention and provide cover for abandoning humanitarian protocols," Lyra replied, consulting a device that displayed both human and alien time standards. "We have approximately 4 hours to decrypt the evidence and transmit it to authorities who can act on the information." David activated his most sophisticated decryption systems, understanding that his decision to help would transform him from neutral technical support into active participant in operations that could either prevent renewed warfare or make him a target for elimination by forces with resources and motivation to suppress inconvenient truths. "All right," he said, beginning the complex process of interfacing human quantum computing with alien encryption. "Let's see what's worth killing people to keep secret." The decryption process revealed information that was worse than David had imagined. Not just evidence of conspiracy to sabotage refugee operations, but comprehensive documentation of systematic ethnic cleansing disguised as population redistribution and security optimization by officials who had been manipulating humanitarian crises for private profit. "They're not just attacking convoys," David realized as the data device's contents became accessible through his technical expertise. "They're deliberately creating conditions that force refugees into overcrowded facilities where tensions between species can be exploited to justify abandoning protection obligations. While selling weapons to all parties involved and positioning themselves to profit from reconstruction contracts when the fighting resumes," Lyra added, monitoring security systems that were beginning to show alerts indicating unauthorized personnel movement throughout the station. "The humanitarian crisis has been artificially created and maintained to serve private interests rather than legitimate security concerns." David's workstation began displaying emergency alerts as station monitoring systems detected multiple security breaches involving armed personnel with override codes that shouldn't exist in current authorization databases. "They know we've accessed the data," Lyra observed, her calm professionalism maintained despite obvious danger. "The courier's bond is now active, David Walsh. Your decision to help me has made you legally responsible for completing this mission regardless of personal risk." As armed figures began moving through Meridian Station's corridors with weapons and equipment that suggested they were prepared for elimination rather than arrest, David realized that his simple technical assistance had evolved into a survival situation that would either expose systematic conspiracy or ensure that both he and Lyra died together while the evidence remained suppressed. So, he said, activating emergency transmission protocols while preparing to defend their position against forces whose approach suggested they had no intention of allowing witnesses to survive, I'm guessing this courier's bond doesn't include hazard pay. Lyra's smile was bright enough to activate the operations center's emergency lighting. David Walsh, she said, his name carrying warmth that went beyond formal diplomatic protocols, I think you're about to discover that some missions are worth considerably more than financial compensation. As the first armed figures reached the Technical Operations Center, and David realized that his quiet night of network maintenance had become a life-or-death race to expose truth before it could be permanently suppressed, he understood that sometimes the most important technical problems were solved not with better algorithms or more sophisticated equipment, but with the courage to serve principles larger than personal safety. The activation of the courier's bond triggered immediate responses throughout Meridian Station's security networks. The evidence David had helped decrypt painted a picture of systematic exploitation that went far beyond simple war profiteering. Refugee processing had been deliberately mismanaged to create overcrowding and resource shortages that could be exploited to justify abandoning humanitarian obligations while resuming profitable military operations. They're not just sabotaging convoys, David said, uploading the evidence to secure transmission protocols while monitoring the approaching security threats. They're turning refugee assistance into a breeding ground for the very conflicts they claim to be trying to prevent, while positioning themselves to profit from both the humanitarian disasters and the military interventions that follow. The courier's bond provides legal standing to transmit this information through channels that bypass normal governmental review processes, Lyra added, activating communication systems that connected them to loyal authorities from both species. The first assault on the Technical Operations Center came from personnel wearing station security uniforms, but carrying weapons that definitely weren't part of standard peacekeeping equipment. David's emergency protocols had sealed the center's access points, but the attacking forces were using override codes that suggested coordination with station administration at levels that should have made such access impossible. They have inside help, David observed, monitoring security feeds that showed the attackers' sophisticated knowledge of station layout and defensive systems. Someone in command authority has been helping this operation. Someone whose profitable operations depend on maintaining the refugee crisis rather than resolving it, Lyra replied, coordinating with defensive systems that the courier's bond had activated to protect their location. The evidence includes communication logs that identify co-conspirators throughout both governmental hierarchies. David's technical expertise proved essential for maintaining their defensive position while continuing the evidence transmission that would either expose the conspiracy or remain incomplete if they were eliminated before the upload could finish. His knowledge of station systems allowed him to reroute power, enhance security barriers, and maintain communication links despite systematic attempts to isolate them from external assistance. Transmission is 60% complete, David announced, monitoring progress while coordinating with Lyra's use of courier emergency protocols that were summoning assistance from authorities whose loyalty to humanitarian principles exceeded their susceptibility to corruption. But they're jamming our communication channels faster than I can establish new ones. Then we use the maintenance tunnels, Lyra decided, activating portable communication equipment that could continue the transmission while they moved to more defensible positions. Your knowledge of station infrastructure combined with courier authority should allow us to reach the main communication array. The escape through Meridian Station's technical corridors became a running battle between David's knowledge of maintenance routes and the attackers' sophisticated equipment and override capabilities. Lyra's courier training included combat techniques that complemented David's technical problem-solving, creating an effective partnership despite the obvious mismatch between a systems engineer and someone whose mission had prepared her for exactly this type of survival scenario. The main communication array is 3 levels up, David said, consulting station schematics while avoiding patrol routes that would bring them into contact with superior forces. But they'll be expecting us to head there, and they have enough people to cover all the primary access routes. Then we use the emergency escape pods, Lyra suggested, her tactical thinking adapted to the station's layout through David's technical expertise. If we can reach the diplomatic section, courier protocols grant emergency access to evacuation systems that they can't override without violating both species' diplomatic immunity laws. The plan required crossing through areas of the station where the attacking forces had concentrated their efforts. But David's maintenance access and Lyra's courier authority created combinations of legal standing and technical capability that the conspiracy hadn't anticipated when planning their elimination operation. Transmission is 85% complete, David reported as they reached the diplomatic section and activated emergency communication protocols that connected them directly to oversight authorities on both the human homeworld and the alien homeworld. But we need 10 more minutes to ensure complete data transfer to all recipient networks. The final assault came as they reached the communication array, with the conspiracy's forces making a desperate attempt to prevent the evidence transmission that would expose their systematic exploitation of humanitarian crises for private profit. But the courier's bond had activated protective protocols that made the communication center an internationally protected zone where violence against diplomatic personnel would trigger automatic intervention by neutral peacekeeping forces. "This is Admiral Santos of the Human Oversight Command," came a transmission from forces responding to the evidence broadcasts. "We have confirmation of the conspiracy allegations and are moving to arrest personnel involved in the unauthorized assault on Meridian Station." "This is High Commander Velnara of the Alien Protection Corps," came a parallel response. "The courier mission is under our protection, and any interference with humanitarian evidence transmission will be treated as an act of war against civilian populations." The successful completion of the evidence transmission occurred just as loyal forces from both species arrived to secure Meridian Station and arrest the conspiracy members whose coordination had been documented in the decrypted communications. David and Lyra's survival of the elimination attempts provided living witnesses to supplement the comprehensive digital evidence that would reshape humanitarian policy for both civilizations. "So," David said as station security was restored and they prepared to provide testimony about the conspiracy's operations, "I'm guessing this courier's bond involves more ongoing responsibilities than just completing the emergency mission." Lyra's smile was radiant enough to activate the communication array's status indicators. "David Walsh," she said, his name carrying affection that went beyond formal diplomatic protocols, "I think you've just discovered that some technical problems can only be solved by people who care more about protecting others than about protecting themselves." As they began the complex process of coordinating with investigators from both species while ensuring that refugee operations could continue without systematic sabotage, David realized that his simple expertise in network security had evolved into something considerably more complex: responsibility for ensuring that humanitarian technology served human welfare rather than private profit. The work ahead would be challenging. But as David looked at Lyra, whose courage and intelligence had made their survival possible, he understood that sometimes the most important engineering problems weren't about building better systems, but about finding better people to operate them in service of principles that went beyond political boundaries and species differences. The trials that followed revealed the full scope of the conspiracy that had been systematically exploiting refugee crises for private gain. Operations involving officials from both human and alien governments who had been coordinating attacks on humanitarian convoys while manipulating supply distribution to create overcrowding and interspecies tensions that justified abandoning protection obligations in favor of more profitable military solutions. The evidence that David and Lyra transmitted, announced Chief Prosecutor Martinez during the joint tribunal that had been established to address crimes against both species' civilian populations, documents systematic ethnic cleansing disguised as population management, with refugee assistance programs being deliberately mismanaged to create justifications for resumed hostilities. David found himself serving as key witness in proceedings that transformed his technical observations about communication interference into crucial testimony about the coordination mechanisms that had made the conspiracy possible. His role as Lyra's bonded protector under the courier's bond provided legal standing that ensured their evidence could not be suppressed through political maneuvering. The quantum encryption protocols that protected this information, David explained during his testimony, required cooperation between human and alien technical expertise, specifically to ensure that no single party could access the evidence without agreeing to work together for humanitarian rather than political purposes. 6 months later, David found himself in an office that combined human technical efficiency with alien aesthetic principles, serving as Director of Technical Security for the joint humanitarian operations that had emerged from the conspiracy's exposure and the successful prosecution of officials whose profitable operations had required maintaining rather than resolving refugee crises. The new oversight protocols are exceeding all projections, Lyra reported, her role as special coordinator for courier operations keeping her busy with programs that ensured information about humanitarian emergencies could be transmitted and acted upon regardless of political complications that might delay conventional diplomatic channels. The integration principles we established are being adopted by refugee assistance programs throughout this sector of space. Integration principles that started with you sitting calmly in my chair and asking for help decrypting evidence that certain people were willing to kill to suppress, David replied, still amazed by the trajectory that a simple request for technical assistance had created. Though I have to admit, serving as institutional guarantor of humanitarian technology is considerably more complex than routine network maintenance. More complex than you anticipated when you accepted night shift duty? Much more complex, but also more meaningful than I knew was possible. David looked out at the operations center where human and alien technical specialists worked together on refugee assistance projects that served both species' humanitarian obligations. Besides, the company is exceptional. Lyra laughed, her bioluminescent markings shifting to patterns that David had learned to recognize as deep contentment mixed with affection for their shared work. Even when the company includes a former courier whose idea of relaxing conversation involves reviewing security protocols and data transmission procedures? Especially then, though I should probably mention that your tendency to activate ancient protective laws is keeping our legal staff constantly busy updating compliance procedures. That's what you get for bonding with someone whose courier training emphasized mission completion over personal safety, Lyra said, taking his hand with the easy affection that had grown from their shared survival and mutual commitment to serving humanitarian principles. Besides, protective bonds seemed to work well for us. David looked around their shared office where impossible partnerships between systems engineers and alien couriers were creating humanitarian innovations that served refugee protection rather than political convenience. You know, he said, squeezing her hand gently, when I woke up to find you sitting in my chair, the most complicated outcome I imagined was maybe having to explain to station security why I'd allowed unauthorized access to the Technical Operations Center. And instead? Instead, I discovered that accepting responsibility for someone else's mission creates stronger motivation for success than any amount of technical training, that ancient protective laws can override modern political calculations when properly activated, and that the most important data encryption problems are solved not just with better algorithms, but with better people who care about what the information is used for. More complex than routine technical work? Much more complex than anything they covered in systems engineering training, but exactly as complex as it needed to be. David brought her hand to his lips, noting how her markings shifted to configurations that spoke of joy and partnership. Some missions are worth accepting even when they change your life in ways you never anticipated. As they continued their work developing technical security protocols that served humanitarian assistance rather than political manipulation, David reflected on how dramatically his understanding of his purpose had evolved. He'd started as someone who maintained computer networks to keep operations running smoothly, and somehow become someone who proved that technical expertise could serve human welfare more effectively when combined with personal commitment to protecting the people who depended on those systems. The work was more complex now, involving legal frameworks that spanned star systems and security protocols that had to account for political motivations that prioritized private profit over public welfare. But the fundamental mission remained the same: ensure that technology served the people who needed it most, and that information could flow freely enough to prevent systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations. David Walsh had always believed that effective systems engineering required maintaining professional distance from the political implications of the networks he maintained and the data he processed. He just never imagined that the most important technical problem he'd ever solve would involve protecting someone whose courier mission revealed that professional distance could become professional negligence when the systems he maintained were being exploited to harm the very people they were supposed to serve. 3 months later, as David watched the formal dedication of the Meridian Station Memorial with Lyra presiding as Director of Humanitarian Communications while he served as Chief of Technical Security for the Joint Refugee Assistance Programs, he marveled at how a simple request for decryption assistance had become the foundation for proving that technical expertise served humanitarian purposes more effectively when combined with personal commitment to protecting vulnerable populations. Any regrets about waking up to find a strange alien girl in your chair asking for help with something that could prevent a war? Lyra asked as they prepared for the ceremony that would commemorate the first anniversary of the conspiracy's exposure. Only that it took a courier mission and systematic conspiracy to teach me that the most important technical problems aren't about making systems run more efficiently, David replied, his smile bright enough to activate the memorial's communication displays. They're about ensuring that systems serve the people who need them most, regardless of whether such service is profitable for those who operate them. Sometimes the most important missions find the people who are ready to accept them, Lyra said, her luminous markings telling stories of partnership that would reshape humanitarian technology. The courier's bond simply provided legal frameworks for cooperation that was already waiting to be activated. As they walked together toward the memorial ceremony that would mark the beginning of a new era in refugee assistance, David realized that his technical expertise had evolved into something that protected not just individual operations, but the principle that information technology could serve humanitarian purposes more effectively than the political calculations that had previously governed relations between species learning to trust each other despite systematic efforts to maintain profitable conflicts. The most important network he'd ever secured had been the connection between someone who needed help and someone willing to provide it, regardless of the complications such assistance might create for careers that had been built around maintaining comfortable distances from the consequences of their work.